I should know this from the old days. Oh, all right. Well, it will be necessary. I now have been reminded by able counsel Boop twice for each of us to speak into this thing, even though we don't need it to communicate with each other. As we discuss the staffing, the Senate has very generously agreed to provide the AV staffing for these our various proceedings, and in order to be recorded, we need to be talking into a live mic. So even though it's a little bit beyond what's necessary for our purposes, we're not going to have court reporters for these proceedings. I know the judge has been schooled better than I in the need to let those folks do their jobs carefully. Here we can just kind of roll along, and the AV folks will make a permanent record so long as we push the mic. So let me say again, we are calling together the first meeting of the Task Force on Child Protection, which was created by a joint resolution of the General Assembly. I think I'm here because I have difficulty keeping a job. I have served in a variety of capacities that sort of bump up against the issues we're here to discuss. Once upon a time, I was counsel to the State DA's Association, actually at a time when I think we were less aware of these issues. Served in the legislature and was chair at one time of the Aging and Youth Committee in the Senate at a time when we took up a revision of the Child Protective Services law. I don't think the last comprehensive rewrite anymore. I think that's been done a time or two since. But then I became a judge and trying cases on the Common Pleas bench in Bucks County and heard way too many of these cases, and of course heard testimony from one of our other panelists on a number of occasions, and gave up a perfectly good judgeship to run for district attorney in Bucks County. And I'm looking forward to, in the course of these proceedings, talking about what we do in Bucks County, which I believe is certainly leads to very effective investigations and prosecutions of these cases. Obviously, the big issue we're here to inquire into is making sure that cases that need to get to the criminal justice system or otherwise attended to do succeed in getting there. Would I ask Dr. Berger, could you introduce yourself and again give just a little bit of your background? Let me say before I pass things over to you, I am very humbled to be a part of this very distinguished group, as we hear, as all of you hear, the credentials of the folks who have been selected by the governor and the legislature to serve. I'm very humbled and excited at the expertise in your various fields, which all of you bring to these deliberations. Dr. Berger.
My name is Rachel Berger. I said I'm also very honored to be on this committee. I've worn a couple of hats in child protection in Pennsylvania. I've been at the Child Advocacy Center at Children's Hospital for a little over a decade. I'm sorry, Children's Hospital Pittsburgh. Sorry, Children's Hospital Pittsburgh for a little over a decade. So doing clinical work and evaluating primarily physical, but also some sexual abuse, neglect, failure to thrive, really the whole gamut of child abuse or cases concerning for child abuse. At this point, I'm primarily a clinical researcher and do a lot of work in epidemiology of child abuse and also in secondary prevention, improving early diagnosis of primarily physical abuse again. And I also do a lot of education of non-medical personnel, non-medical and medical personnel in the state of Pennsylvania, both through the AAP and most recently through some work with the Mechanicsburg Child Protective Services education. So I'm kind of wearing a lot of different hats. So hopefully I'll have something to bring to this committee. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Cindy Christian, and it is a delight for me to be here, and I look forward to the hard work that's ahead. I am, by training, a pediatrician. I've been a pediatrician at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia for 27 or more years. Most of those years, I've been one of the child abuse pediatricians and have directed our Center for Child Protection and Health at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. I'm a professor of pediatrics at the University of Pennsylvania in the Perelman School of Medicine. And for the last year and a half, I've spent half of my time at the Department of Human Services, the Child Welfare Agency in Philadelphia, as the department's first medical director. And my responsibilities there are really to develop policies and systems so that we can begin to improve the health and the well-being of children in the child welfare system. In addition, when I'm not at CHOP or downtown, I am the chair of the Committee on Child Abuse and Neglect for the American Academy of Pediatrics, and I do some other national and have done a lot of statewide work in the past, and it's really also a pleasure for me to be back with old friends and new colleagues to do some more good work. So thank you. I'd like to thank the governor for appointing me, and I look forward to it. Oh, you got one.
Hello, I'm Delilah Rumberg. I am the CEO of the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Rape and the National Sexual Violence Resource Center. I started doing this type of work when I moved to Pennsylvania in the in '79, and became the director of a battered women's shelter in York County, and was there for 10 years, and had the privilege of working with Beverly Macrith when she was just a young thing starting out in children, youth, and services at that time. I raised money for the American Heart Association for 5 years, and then I've been at PCAR 17 years now. During the time I've been at PCAR, I've served with Dave Heckler on the Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency and the Victim Services Advisory Committee. And most recently, I spent about 4 years with the Department of Defense working on the task force that looked at sexual assault in the military academies, as well as sexual assault in the services, which was an assessment, a global assessment of sexual assault in the military services. So again, I'm glad to be here and look forward to working to my fellow members.
Thank you. Chairman, I didn't know. I think we parked together. I could have gotten in a lot quicker if I'd have followed you. But I'm also very, very honored to be here. My name is Gary Ipock. I'm the executive director of Glen Mill Schools, and I see a few people around the table that I do recognize, and anxious to meet and get to know the others. I think the group that was appointed by the Senate, 3 or 4 people, it was described in one piece in the paper that we had over 80 years of experience, and I see that as an excitement that we're going to be able to use some of that experience, and also the humility of knowing that in 80 years, you know, we still have problems and maybe they're getting worse. I don't know, but we'll certainly address those. My involvement at Glen Mill Schools has spanned since 1969. People kindly remind me that's 6 decades that I've been there. So even though my experience in the area of child abuse is narrowed down to a specific in dealing with young men in institutions primarily, we deal with over 1,000, interact with over 1,000 young men each day at Glen Mills, both on grounds and outside in the family. So obviously our involvement in the issue of abuse comes up quite frequently. I'm honored to be here. Thank you.
Can I make an addendum real quickly?
Oh, by all means.
I better do this. I was the co-founder of the Protect Our Children's Committee, and that was established many, many years ago now in Pennsylvania, and that's very important, and I failed to mention that, and I apologize.
And perhaps during these proceedings, Mr. Ipock, I can get to find out some of your secrets for fielding great athletic teams. A great facility. Next, Mr. Koutourakis has already described this endeavor as an adventure, and I think that's a great spirit to be going into this with.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. I am Jason Koutourakis. I'm in a private practice. My firm is Abaum and Koutourakis, located here in South Central Pennsylvania with our primary office in Carlisle. I believe the things that bring me to the table was the Speaker's appointment appointee. Years ago, in 2004, I formed the Children and Youth Solicitors Association that is now comprised of over 60 member counties and probably 125 child welfare attorneys. In 2006, I was recognized by the Pennsylvania Bar Association as its Child Advocate of the Year. In 2001, I was appointed by Justice Saylor as one of the members of the inaugural Procedural Rules Committee for Juvenile Rules. Spent a term limited out there after 6 years. Currently, I'm involved in spearheading a new training program called Child First Pennsylvania. That program is targeted towards the training of what I call the responders to suspected child abuse, that being prosecutors, law enforcement, children youth solicitors, caseworkers, and forensic interviewers. We began that process nearly 2 years ago with our first training, March of 2011. It's a week-long training, and we've trained 15 counties, and that will be a perpetual training program that will absolutely dovetail into what we're doing here and impacting in a positive way our most precious resource, and that's not the natural gas here in Pennsylvania, it's the children here. So it is an honor. I know many of you. I know of your reputations, and I'm very proud and honored to be a part of this very important endeavor with all of you.
Thank you. And, Mr. Secretary, I'm going to call upon you in just a minute, but we'll complete the members of the panel. Ms. Hobbs, well, I'll let you pronounce your name first.
My name is Carol Hobbs. Sorry. Okay. I gather you heard my name, did you? My name is Carol Hospichato, and I am also honored to sit here with all of you. I have worked in the human service field for over 35 years. I have worked with ChildLink when it first opened its doors. I was the first program manager, supervisor there to have staff. I was there over 8 years. And I've worked in Woodhaven, Temple University. I was a supervisor there for 8 years as well. I worked for Horizon House as well as a manager for the homeless, for mental health. And I was an AIDS coordinator with the AIDS Task Force before as well, case manager. And presently, I'm working with the Department of Human Services. I've been there almost 12 years. I started out as an intake investigator and then family preservation. And now I'm with the special unit, with medical unit, which I do get to work with Dr. Christian. So once again, I'm honored to be here.
Thank you. Ms. Bernard.
Good afternoon, everyone. Chairman Heckler. My name is Jackie Bernard, and I'm a prosecutor from Blair County. I started my prosecution career in child abuse, was a full-time prosecutor there, which was grant-funded. During that process, we created a multidisciplinary approach to child abuse issues. I since have moved on from that position to only prosecute child abuse cases, and I now supervise about 10 other attorneys in our office, those of which handle child abuse prosecutions. I'm also part of the advisory board for our local children and youth. I sit on the child death review team in Blair County. I've done several trainings for Family Services, which is our victim services group that Delilah works with very closely. And it's just a complete honor and privilege to be here with all of you. Dr. Christian trained me years ago in 1995. I think we were in South Carolina. So it's such an honor to be sitting at a table with her. And she was really young, too, as we both were. And I've had the privilege of working with Dr. Berger on some cases as well. So it is a complete honor to be here, and I look forward to the work that we have ahead of us. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Art Grimm. I'm a juvenile court judge and have been since 1988. In my previous life, when I was practicing law, my wife was the founder of the Berks County Rape Crisis Center, Domestic Violence Center, and back in the days when there was no such thing as safe housing, we opened up our house to victims, so I've experienced that piece of this terrible problem. Since 1988, I've been a judge. I was appointed I was appointed to the Juvenile Court Judges Commission in 1997. I've been chair since 2005. And in the years that I've been a judge, the vast majority of those years have been in the Delinquency and Dependency Court. And again, I look very, very forward to serving with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. And an ex officio member of our task force is the Secretary of Public Welfare, Secretary Alexander. We're delighted that you could be with us.
It's a pleasure. Do I have this on?
Press the button.
There we go. I should know that. I've been in this seat many times. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. This is an important committee. To all of you here, the Department of Public Welfare, as you know, is entrusted with the care of our most vulnerable and poorest residents and citizens of the Commonwealth. The unique role of the Office of Children, Youth, and Families is that it touches every child. It's much like the mission of public health, which encompasses all citizens. And we're here to be guardians of these children and to take care of them from birth and hopefully not until death. Hopefully they're out of the system. We're very happy that Beverly McArith is on this committee. Beverly is the Deputy Secretary for the Office of Children, Youth, and Families. She's the resident expert in this area at the department, and I will be looking to her for her recommendations on how to redesign and reshape our mission. As you know, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania has remained, the child abuse rate in Pennsylvania has remained very low. However, we have much work and great work to do. So I look forward to working with all of you to redesign our system, to provide a medical model for our children that encompasses much more than just safety, education, and health care. And I think this is a grand opportunity for us to be able to really do something substantial. I want to see something come out of this. I don't want this to be just another committee. So I think my role here, all of you are much more of an expert than I am. My role will be to probably work with the chairman to really ensure that we have a work product that is very healthy, it's robust, and that we can be proud of and show to the Commonwealth and to the nation. So I'm very happy to be on this and honored to be on this committee.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And your, I suppose, designee, Ms. McArith, you've introduced her. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit about your background.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Welcome.
I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to see, again, people that we've worked with for 20, should I go there? 20, 30 years. And I just wanted to, I've been the Deputy Secretary of the Office of Children, Youth, and Families for about 2 months. So what I wanted to do is just give you a quick overview of my experience so you have some idea of from where I come in my perspective. And I started out in 1980. I was a children youth caseworker right out of college. I did that for 3 years and became a supervisor, and I did that for the next 4 years. I then had a great opportunity to go to the York County District Attorney's Office, and I developed the second in the state, first was Philadelphia, child abuse unit. We were a very successful child abuse unit, and then we expanded out and set up a Stop Violence Against Women program, a juvenile prosecution unit, and I also developed a victim witness program in York County. From then, I had the opportunity, actually I was working on legislation, and the chairman here doesn't remember the story. I reminded him the other day, but I met that woman over there, Mary Taylor, and the senator who helped me make changes to the Child Protective Services law. I was up here lobbying about an issue of what crimes or what incidents would be reported to police. And I was that lone wolf. I was just up here knocking on doors. Didn't know anybody, didn't know anything, but I thought I'd try my hand at that. And this man gave me an opportunity to come into his committee and talk, where I met Mary Taylor, who was with the governor's office, who then called me, and my next job was with the Ridge administration as the deputy director of the governor's community partnership for safe children. Wonderful job, lots of fun. Did that for a couple years, went back to York as executive director of the Healthy York County Coalition, learned about I've been so focused on child abuse issues that I forgot how everything intersects, and really had the opportunity to learn about health care and child welfare, early childhood education, quality of life issues, and how it's all the same thing. There's so many connections there that we needed to make. Did that for a couple years and was asked to run for the General Assembly, and served in the House of Representatives for 8 years, representing York County's 196th Legislative District, served on Children Youth Committee, Judiciary, Health and Welfare, Aging, and it just was a great opportunity to see another perspective, again, state government and how that worked. I then was asked to come back to York County to be the Executive Director of Human Services, and I was there for 3 years, and in 1 year during that period, I was also the Acting Director for York County Children and Youth. So with children and youth, I've been a worker, a supervisor, and the administrator for a period of time through my career. The Secretary then contacted me, and I'm privileged and honored to be the Deputy Secretary of OCYF. I am here at the request of the administration, at the request of the Secretary, to help this committee and to help the Chairman, and we are open to whatever we come up with here. I'm just so excited about the opportunity to, again, really reframe what does child welfare look like in Pennsylvania, what should it look like. I'm new to this, so for me this is just perfect timing, and I appreciate all of you being here. Thank you.
Thank you. And a kindred spirit, somebody else who can't keep a job.
Sounded like that, didn't it?
That's one of the great things about this, I believe. As you can see, there is a wealth of experience, and I think the thing that's striking is action. All of you have, one way or another, not just sort of academically looked at some piece of this, but have attempted to make a difference in the real world, and that's certainly the perspective we want to take, I think, in examining what the status quo is in Pennsylvania and how we can make it better. I have been struck in the limited amount of time that I've been given this charge by the enthusiastic support of all the branches, or I guess all the branches of government, of course, the judiciary as well. We've just gotten a chance to meet some of the staff. The resolution which created this body provides that certain entities will provide staffing, support, consultation to our efforts, and that brings a whole additional body of people with extraordinary qualifications and background. We've already heard from Ms. Macareth, the Department of Welfare, the Joint State Government Commission, which may be an entity unknown to some of you, but brings to us a tremendous wealth of both experience in looking at various status quos in this state and comparing it to what happens throughout the rest of the United States. They're specifically designated as a resource of the task force. Mr. David John, Jr. is present. He is the Executive Director of Joint State. And I wonder, sir, if you could just well, come on up here, I guess, if you're going to need to speak into the microphone. And maybe you could tell everybody just a little bit about Joint State Government, and then let us know how we can, what we can look for you to do.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the opportunity to be here. I am David John, the Executive Director of the Joint State Government Commission, and I do have with me some of our staff. Our counsel, Steve Rare, is in the back. Our Administrative Assistant, Wendy Baker. One of our experienced researchers, Dr. Helen Hanjana, is with us, as well as two of our legislative interns, Rachel Masterson and Kelsey Connell. So we have a team here today that's anxious to hear what we can do to serve this task force. Essentially, the Joint State Government Commission is a bipartisan, bicameral research arm of the General Assembly. We do both long and short-term research projects for the House and Senate. And over the years, we have done a series of studies, again, both long and short-term, on children's issues, different types of children's issues. So this is not an entirely new issue for us, and so we're very excited and eager to be a part of this and to serve you all in whatever ways we can to help produce a really good final report.
Thank you. It is my understanding that one of your strong suits, if you will, is looking at that you may be our resource to what happens in the rest of the wide world, at least in the United States, in terms of comparative laws, regulations, practices.
Absolutely. In many cases, when we get studies like this, we're asked to examine laws from other states, court decisions, both at the federal level and state level, that would impact the particular issue we're looking at. So that is certainly one resource we will bring to this group. We have a staff of attorneys and researchers that are very, very experienced. Virtually all of them have been with the Commission longer than I have. So they're a tremendous team, and I think they will serve this group very well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
An additional body which has been, which is specifically tasked with our assistance by the resolution, and frankly without which I cannot imagine undertaking this endeavor, is the Juvenile Court Judges Commission. And if I'm not mistaken, Judge Grimm, you are presently the chair? Is that?
I am.
So you're here in both and all capacities, and right behind you is Jim Anderson, who, you speak of time out of mind. I don't know whether, Jim, we get into how long you have been I guess the proper title is Executive Director?
That would be proper.
All right. Well, the JCJC has, from all my years in the legislature and certainly on the bench, is one of the, might say, one of the keels of the ship of state, where matters relating to how this Commonwealth deals with juveniles and dependent children, at least from the judicial perspective. And I think Jim represents a wonderful resource, and certainly a way, apart from Judge Grimm, in which we can be sure that the judges who and their employees, the juvenile probation officers of this Commonwealth will have access to them, and they certainly will have the ability to contribute to these deliberations. The legislature created this endeavor, and I must say, before I had any idea that I was going to have anything to do with it, given some of the events which sadly brought public attention once again to this ongoing problem, occurred, and I read an article in the newspaper to the effect that a resolution was being considered to study the problem. Knowing the legislature, I said to myself, now there's a smart thing to do. This sounds like a good and sensible endeavor. The prime sponsor of the resolution, which actually I guess was enacted, is Senator Ward. Her counsel, Vicki Wilkin, who is, again, long been dealing with many of these issues, and I guess counsel to Aging and Youth, as well as to Senator Ward, is present and has already been extremely helpful, and I anticipate will be a full participant in in what we're doing. Hopefully, we'll have a chance at some future proceeding to hear from Senator Ward, and this does strike me as a good way to go about tackling these issues. Also present is Ryan Boop, the member, the House member who was the prime sponsor of a companion resolution, Representative Marsico, who is the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee. Again, can't be here today, but Mr. Boop is his counsel, I guess, again, counsel to the Judiciary Committee in the House of Representatives. He has already been extremely helpful and much more substantive things than reminding everybody to push the mic button. But he is here. We look forward to his participation and guidance and contributions. Also, by virtue of the governor's foresight and insight, another person with a vast wealth of knowledge in these areas. Bev stole a good bit of my thunder, but we are very fortunate to have Mary Taylor, who is with the Office of General Counsel, I think presently counsel to PCCD, is able to persuade the governor to pry at least a bit of her time loose to help us with these deliberations, and we are extremely fortunate to have her services, and I'm sure that we will benefit from her thoughts, insights, and capability. And last but hardly least, Lieutenant Morachko, I got that right, Lieutenant with the Pennsylvania State Police, Bureau of Criminal Investigation. We were talking the other day, it's not all that easy to get to be a lieutenant in the state police, although he claimed he was just in the right place at the right time, but certainly is familiar with the police end of these investigating these matters, and he is a resource which has been provided by the Pennsylvania State Police. Well, that's also, and actually that may be the most important, one of the most important things we get done today from the practical member standpoint. The Department of Public Welfare has been very generous. We have a number of staff members present. Actually, I'm not sure that Heather's here. She State College at a meeting. Okay, she could not be here. One of the ways in which the secretary, although I'm not even sure he knew it at the time, but has made his support available. My experience in these things is that that you need somebody. All of us need somebody to be a point of contact. Simply. We all have busy schedules. As I get older, I have a secretary who tells me where I'm supposed to be from time to time, especially as we spread out across the state. We're going to need some point of contact just to figure out when and where we're supposed to be places to send correspondence to. And Heather Hallman has, who's with the department, has volunteered, been recruited, some combination thereof, to serve that function. She is establishing an email address so that we can all communicate directly with her and she with us, and that is a thankless task, but one we appreciate very much that she and the department are taking on. We have already talked about how important what we are tasked to do is. So many of you have already touched upon in your comments the various areas of experience that you bring to this endeavor. I am sure that you have reviewed the resolution. Obviously, we are to examine and analyze the practices, processes, and procedures relating to the response to child abuse, to review and analyze laws, procedures, practices, and rules relating to the reporting of child abuse, to hold public hearings, to take testimony relevant to those matters, and obviously to receive and request documents and other forms of information. Without any further comments from me that we don't need, let me just echo what's already been said. This is a matter of great importance. I think an adventure isn't a bad way of putting this. This is a wonderful opportunity for all of us. One hopes to make some substantive change for the better in this Commonwealth. The charge specifically from the legislature takes several forms. One of them is to meet today, and we made it by the 45th day, and to have, I believe, 5 additional meetings and such hearings as we see fit. I would like, and for those who are in attendance, and I'm sure there are a number of folks from particular interested groups, and we'll certainly see and hear from a great many more folks throughout Pennsylvania who are interested in and concerned with this subject before we're done. I want to do everything I can to make this process as transparent as possible. We will certainly, all of our deliberations will be public. We want to make ourselves available geographically throughout this very diverse and fairly large state. And I would suggest that we, although we have sort of a deadline of doing at least our meeting by the end of September, I am mindful and have been reminded by others that we are in the second year of legislative session. If we can identify matters that require legislative action, if we sort of hand it over to the legislature sometime in October, there is very realistically, it's going to be very difficult for anything to get passed in this legislative session. So I'm going to toss out some suggestions, and then I'd very much like to hear from the rest of the committee about your thoughts about a schedule. But I am hoping that we can, generally speaking, take the month of February to amass materials, to share with each other materials that from each of our fields of expertise that might, I know what I know, I don't know what I don't know, and that encompasses an awful lot. And then at least by, say, after Easter, embark upon a series of hearings. I'm thinking at least 3. The tradition, I guess, is west, east, and here in Harrisburg. See if we can identify matters about which we have a fair degree of consensus, particularly if we perceive that that there are matters which would appropriately involve legislative action. One of our charges is to provide the legislature and the governor with periodic reports or updates. I have to look at the exact word, but in here. But I'm kind of hoping that after our hearings, we could, by say May or June, if we can reach consensus on particular things, provide the legislature with whatever we can at that point so that they have the capacity to consider those suggestions, whether some of it may involve existing legislation. I know I would acknowledge receipt from Senator Costa, I believe the minority leader of the Senate. I've lost track of these things these days, but about matters that some of his members have introduced. I'm sure we'll be, as part of the review we do, we'll certainly look at things that are pending presently. It seems to me that we want to, if we can, provide the legislature with some grist for their mill that would then give them a bit of time over the summer to have hearings, to do whatever their processes might suggest, and have some realistic chance of deliberating on those ideas, and if they deem things worthy of passage, get them passed during this legislative session. So with that in mind, I would propose that we spend the month of February with staff gathering information, sharing it with us, sharing information with each other, and simply sort of boning up on everybody else's perspectives. Get together again in March here and put together an agenda in advance, at least once, more as we deem appropriate, but that we lock in as many dates as we can, at least between here and June, and have at least start off with 3 hearings, East, West, and Central, in that time frame. Anybody have any thoughts on that, contrary, or any other thoughts in general on that, at least that part of the scheduling?
Just a point of reference I think we need to be cognizant of is when they break for session for the summer. We need to keep that in mind as we calendar. I'm sure you're aware of that too. But
in terms of trying to get things to them before the session break?
Right.
Well, that's one of the things. I would hope if we all get together in March and say, hey, that bill, House Bill so-and-so or Senate Bill so-and-so really, we all go around the table, what do you think? How does that match up with at least our perceptions, not having at that point had the benefit of hearings? Nothing stops us at any point from sending along an interim update that says, at least so far as all the folks here, or even I want this to be as transparent as possible. If there's a minority report or something, we can do something with less formality than the whole report, but pass those things along as they get there. Certainly, my recollection is that as the budget deliberations go forward, there is a lot of time for the rank and file of the legislature to be taking up matters apart from the budget. But it also occurs to me that if we're serving up some major ideas, the appropriate committees in the houses might use the summer to have hearings or other proceedings that would enable them to do their due diligence, their procedures, so that there would be some time in the fall for them actually to bring things to the floor of the respective houses if that's what they deem appropriate. And then once we get to that point, either identify what we view as low-hanging fruit or formulate some consensus, and maybe identify some things that we're very much not in agreement about. That will maybe all sort of automatically focus us on either the need for additional hearings or certainly the need for gathering additional information, having additional discussions to exhaust all of the subject areas that we believe our overall charge necessitates. Delilah.
I have a question. What about current legislation that isn't moving that might impact some of the things that we would have concerns about. How do you see us addressing that?
Specifically, I would anticipate that over the course of the next couple of weeks, we'll all be provided with copies of that information. I don't think there's anything about our charge that prevents legislators, legislative staff from communicating with us individually. I would hope that if people want the commission, what are we? We're a task force. Whenever I hear task force, I keep thinking I should be looking out for destroyer escorts along covering the horizon. But hopefully, all of those matters will go ultimately to Heather, who will then email them out or send them out to each of us. But if there are bills that are out there that we can reach a consensus about, by all means, let me make the governor appointed me. I've been a lifelong Republican. I don't think that partisan, the legislature does the partisan thing. We're going to, we have one concern, and that is the charge of this resolution and what will increase the safety and well-being of children in this Commonwealth, specifically with regard to abuse and how it gets brought to light. Prevention is one of the things that we're going to have to weigh what's realistic. I don't think we're appointed to rewrite the budget in terms of who should be doing what for whom, but certainly to the extent that there are things out there. In fact, as I thought about this, the model that occurs to me, and I have. And one of the things that I'm thinking, even though it's not directly necessarily on point, I guess it was a interbranch commission report on the tragedies or outrages in Luzerne County was an excellently conducted process. Now, that model, I don't know that suits us as well. So that's almost more like a grand jury undertaking into a specific set of facts and then looking at the implications of those facts. While there may be particular incidents, all of which, or many of which, as far as I know, are still before the courts in one way or another, that cause people to say, hey, we ought to have this task force. I think our charge is broader, and frankly, what has occurred to me as a model is the special session on crime, and that of course was a political thing to begin with, but the agenda was substantially a group of matters that the District Attorneys Association at that time had been trying to get moved in the legislature and hadn't had success, and this was a way of focusing attention. So I think it may be that there's more of a grab bag of ideas it's not like we're the first people to take this subject up. By all means, if there's an already written piece of legislation that addresses something and we can reach a consensus about the concepts there, it doesn't matter who's sponsoring it or who thinks what about it or what what the legislative chairman may be wanting to do with it. We can certainly, if we can reach consensus, we ought to convey that. And I hope on conveying, I think we should do it sooner rather than later, so long as we complete our deliberative obligations. Dr. Christian.
Thank you. I just want to say from kind of the pediatric standpoint, obviously, legislation is a little bit foreign to me, probably to Rachel as well, but that I won't speak for her. But I personally find it important and helpful to hear from a bunch of people before I make a decision about what sounds like a good idea, because every time there's something that's important, you know that you're going to have differences of opinion. And I think that as a task force, I think it's important to hear some of the differences. I think that there are some very unique things about the child protective laws in Pennsylvania that kind of address why we have the lowest we're the kindest, gentlest nation in the, state in the nation when it comes to child abuse statistics, but those of us on the front lines know that it's not all gentle and kind. And, and whether there are any changes that are needed in kind of our GPS, CPS, all of those different kinds of systems, I don't know what the right answer is, but I know that I want to hear from different people with different points of view so that we can, so that we can come to, I don't know who that is, but I just hung up on them, so that we can come to really, I think, the best decision for the state and for the kids. So for me, it's important to hear from people before I say that I think this is a great idea, because I'm sure there are lots of people who don't think every idea is a great idea, and I want to be able to weigh those opinions.
It also seems to me that it's going to be extraordinarily important and helpful to have someone who is helping us with this report who is a good wordsmith, because the extent to which our report makes sense to the legislature, I think, is the extent to which we could hope and anticipate that they'll be supportive. And as counsel and as lawyers, we all know that one little word, one way or the other, can make a heck of a difference. So I just think that's critical, and I think we have that in place, which is wonderful.
That would be I'm very confident in the staff who have been introduced and some of the other folks who support them who haven't necessarily been introduced. So I think if they do the digging, we do the processing, if you will, and dig for ourselves at the hearings, I'm confident that. I think that's very true. Judge, in our brief conversation, you had made a suggestion, at least with regard to your own scheduling, so far as hearings, a desire to keep them sort of in a cluster. What sort of time are we talking, 1 week or a couple of weeks?
Well, I felt that way because it seems to me that these hearings will have a certain amount of exposure through the press, and the extent to which people are aware of the hearings and are perhaps more prone to come forward. I think there's an advantage in that sense if you do it close to one another. And from my own, selfish personal point of view, if we could keep it to 1 or 2 weeks, it would be helpful, I think, in terms of scheduling. I had thought we might do as many as 5 hearings. If we're going to do 3 hearings, perhaps we could do it all within 2 weeks. Just my thought.
Anybody have any reactions to that? I'm purposely sort of not looking over at staff who may be holy Hannah, because there are some practical logistical issues, but that's one of the reasons I thought that taking the month of February to get organized and share materials would give us the ability to do that. Anybody for whom, and again, doctors probably have the toughest scheduling issues. Anybody for all I know, and the classic interaction of doctors and lawyers and judges in particular. I'm having court, and I've got a courtroom full of people. Where are they? And we may very well. I'm not trying to put a cap on the number of hearings. I am mindful that if we don't at least see whether there are things we can reach consensus about by, say, June, then if we just wait for to do a report, and unquestionably we'll do one, and hopefully it will be the very best effort we can put out. But even if we're sort of ahead and get that done during the summer somehow, the legislature isn't going to be able to do anything with it this term. And unfortunately, one of the practicalities, and I'll wait to see if the Senate staff shuts off the mics or something, but one of the realities is that then you get into no matter how wonderful a bill is, unless there's a great deal of clamor, it gets into somebody's committee, and if it's got somebody else's name on it, then, gee whiz, well, what about, I get one of mine out of the House, and all that stuff goes on. And so there's just an awful lot of sort of energy wastage in the process if you get into the full session. But nobody's going to rush to, I'm hoping maybe there are some, what I refer to as low-hanging fruit, some things that once we've looked at them, we can all say, yeah, I'm comfortable with that. That's a piece of this puzzle, and pass that along to the legislature. If we can't reach consensus, we can, and we just, plow ahead. Thinking, yes, Beth.
I was wondering if, and maybe I'm a little premature with this, but I can tell you in the last 2 months, I've been struggling with the scope of the issue. And, when we talk about the practice, process, and procedures, oh my gosh, there's so much out there. So I'm trying to think, one of the things we've provided you with is a manual which has the Child Protective Services Law, the Juvenile Act. In the front of the book, there's a mission and guiding principles for the court, which are the same as the Department of Public Welfare, OCYF, is a partner with that, so is the JCJC. So that all talks about mission of the system, of dependent children. We've added some other materials in here, mandated reporter law. So this is something to read in February, but you know what, I can go on and on, because I'm writing notes to myself, and I'm writing, send them copies of the safety assessment, send them the risk assessment, send them the ages and stages, so you know what we're currently doing, and I can go on and on. So are we, maybe as a group, I don't know how to address this, Mr. Chairman, you could hopefully help. Again, how do we pick? What is the scope? Because this is so broad, and there are so many issues associated with what we're doing to protect children in Pennsylvania. I think the mandated reporter part may be easier. You've got a little piece here. We've got ideas. We know what happened in other states. I bet you we could address that fairly quickly and come to a consensus of what makes sense. Do we need to expand? Do we not? So I'm real comfortable with that piece. I'm not real comfortable with the bigger picture, and I was hoping maybe somebody could share some ideas.
If I could just chime in. This is such a grand and unique opportunity that I'm hopeful that from the outset we don't try to narrow where we go, because we may miss an opportunity to really do something that's unique, not just here, but nationally, and be a leader in child abuse. And so if we can not restrain the scope just yet, we might have to at some point, but look at what happens from the date of the onset of the initial report through the investigation, what's that look like, and never forget the end piece, which sometimes gets forgotten, that's treatment and consequences for those that are the abusers. So I'm hopeful that at least from the onset we can keep an open mind and try to paint with a big brush at first, and then we'll work through the minutia later. I'm hopeful.
I was going to make a similar comment insofar as I think one of the things that I've noticed the most is that these systems are all connected. And I think from my perspective, we talk a lot about reporting. On the other end, I said expungement is something that is intricately connected to reporting, to indicating, and we tend to forget about it. It's not quite as sexy or anything like that, but expungement has a tremendous impact on all these other things. So I think it's very hard, at least from the outset, as Jason said, to narrow it, because these are so interconnected. And I agree, mandated reporting might be a little different because in a way, it is its own little silo. But these other ones, I think, are just even more interconnected than we sometimes recognize. So I agree that I wouldn't from the outset, that maybe part of it is recognizing this is a very interconnected system, and you can't always make one change. And I think that's been one of the problems. We make a change to one part, not recognizing how it affects the others.
And if I just could follow up real quick with that as well, you referenced, and I kind of focus on the CPSL, Child Protective Services Law. I see that the departments included the Crimes Code as well, and there was a lot of public outcry about statutes of limitations as it relates to the Criminal Code. And so, that's why I said we need to make sure that the window is wide open in all these considerations. So we look at all those things that the public's concerned about and all the stakeholders are as well.
I like what you said, because that is actually at least giving us that makes sense to me, because starting to look at, and then how do you want to otherwise I'm afraid we'll be all over the place.
You may even need a hearing to come up with a framework. You might need to hear from the stakeholders to see what the scope is.
That's fine. I guess the concern that I have, and maybe I need to get up to speed on some of the parts of the system that I'm not familiar with. We have a charge from the legislature, and I don't have any difficulty with interpreting that broadly where children's well-being is concerned. I'm not sure that I can envision having a hearing that says to everybody who may take an interest in this, well, what should we be looking into? Certainly, I expect everybody who's got a concern about this to tell us what they think the needs of children are and how they would properly be addressed. And some of that may be off the narrow topic, and I don't picture myself gaveling them down. And of course, we don't have a gavel purposely, but no, don't want one. But I'm sure the judge can identify. I've sat through plenty of irrelevant testimony in my day. Stand a little bit more, but we have a legislative charge, and I'm not. I think we have been told, at least broadly, what we're to be taking up. A concern that I've had about hearings is that you have two sort of cross forces when you think about putting together an agenda. One is geography, getting out, affording people throughout the state the opportunity simply to be heard broadly on these issues. The other, because of the geography, we don't want to be dragging people from it. It'd be a hardship to Philadelphia when they live in Pittsburgh or Erie. On the other hand, I think, at least the way my brain works, it's helpful to have a broad theme to a hearing or a broad subject of inquiry beyond just the total scope of anything that's relevant to our undertaking. So one of the things I was kind of hoping, once we have had a chance to assimilate this material, and that's the thing, you may all be way ahead of where I am and sort of ready to put together an agenda now, but I was sort of hoping that one of the things that we could do, or more realistically that staff could do, is sort of put out the hue and cry. This process starts today. I'm not sure what press attention there will be to it, but that we specifically reach out to all of the legislators, to all of the identified groups in interest, and I think staff knows most of them. We probably know most of them. And say, in case you didn't notice, and of course a number of people have, we've already gotten materials from, for instance, the Protect Children Committee. I think those have already been duplicated, so everybody can be taking those away today. But that this is the time when we kind of broadcast this as widely as possible, say, hey, we're going to have hearings. Does your group want to be heard? Are there, simply maybe do some ads in the paper. Again, these are straightened financial times. We don't want to get too lavish, but make it be known that we're going to have hearings and welcome people. Ms. Taylor, do you have a suggestion?
Well, we lawyers have been talking about here. We don't have a recommendation yet. Just that
I think the record.
Mr. Anderson and all of your lawyers have been talking. And we're advising that it might be wise to follow the scope of the resolution. In that, first of all, the public expectation with regard to the tragedy in Penn State was some sort of failure in the mandatory report obligations of the law. And the first element that you're charged to examine, if you look at page 1 of the resolution, subsection 4, the language on line 13, is to ascertain any inadequacies relating to the mandatory reporting of child abuse. So our recommendation for your consideration is that perhaps your first round of hearings would be focused on the mandatory reporting issue. We could certainly move on from there, but in terms of being obedient to your charge under the resolution and having that be a kickoff point, because certainly the resolution goes beyond that, but in terms of, I think, fulfilling the public expectation with regard to the most recent incidents, it might be wise to start with mandatory report. It's just a recommendation from your staff. Go ahead.
Okay, I was just wondering then, if, once we decide whatever the topic of those hearings may be, I think there may be some people that we specifically invite. I mean, I think there'll be general comments that are going to want to be submitted, but I think once we know, we may officially invite certain parties or certain organizations to also come before us.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Ms. Bernard?
I was just going to make a suggestion also that we perhaps leave open the idea of doing more than 3 hearings in those select locations for the simple reason that Ms. Taylor pointed out, is that one of the basis for this creation of this task force was the Penn State issue and what happened with the lack of follow-through for the people who the public believe were mandatory reporters. And I think it might be a good effort on our part to go to a location, whether it be, which Blair is just south of State College of Center County, whether it be Center County or whether it be some other geographical location other than just Harrisburg, Philadelphia, and Pittsburgh. Likewise, the same would be the case, I think, if we were to go north. And I just would like to leave that open, maybe, as a possibility.
Absolutely. Our charge under the resolution says as many hearings as we see fit, and there's a specific minimum number of meetings, but the hearings are open-ended, and I'm not, apart from budgetary constraints, and actually, while we're on that subject, let me just say that the resolution, unlike some others, doesn't provide, I think it provides that we get actual expenses and doesn't really say much of anything else. And the spirit with which all of the organizations have sort of pitched in, I believe, for instance, that that since there's no provision for who pays for our expenses, the agreement has been struck that the appointing entity, whether it be a caucus of the House or the Senate, or in a number of our cases the governor's office, would be paying those expenses, but it all goes into Heather, and she'll, the bookkeeping somebody else handles. But so there's been a very cooperative approach to this. I guess we'll need to discuss, frankly, the only concern that I have, and maybe I'm still wearing my judicial hat as a prosecutor, I don't want all the pretrial publicity that you can get, who cares about poisoning jury panels, but some of the issues, whether it be the tragedies in State College, whether it be, I guess, read in the paper the other day that the Philadelphia prosecutor had proclaimed the Archdiocese as an unindicted co-conspirator in the proceedings there. Those are things that I'm very concerned about, not obtaining jury panels and directly. We're not going to solve, I don't think, who's guilty or who's innocent in the abuse cases anywhere. We have been given a wonderful opportunity to use that as impetus to get at a much broader issue. And actually, I've been waiting. We had some discussions earlier, and Bev had a wonderful reaction, which is right on the money, which is, heck, State College, this is going on all over the place and all the time. It is a sad fact of life. It's what keeps all of us in business one way or another, tragically. I have a situation, and again, I guess that's still waiting trial, in which we had managed to dig into one gal being victimized, and other complaints about the same offender had been made in a couple of different police departments. They kind of looked at it, couldn't really get anywhere with it. The reason that this one particular case, we managed to get a handle into it, and a terrific detective in one of our townships really got a hold of it, is because the aunt of this victim was really the driving force. Her mother really wasn't that focused on the problem, and it turns out the aunt had been victimized years and years ago by the same guy. And we actually went to the extent of having a couple of press conferences just to call people's attention, and we got a flock of people in who had all been victimized by the same individual. so that this, there's a much broader problem, and certainly the mandated reporter is one of the core issues. I think it's a good suggestion that we start there, but we all know that this is a much broader problem. Again, we may be getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, and maybe I'm just sort of a plodding German, and sort of I envision one thing at a time. And again, an awful lot of you know an awful lot more than I do about this. I'm thinking if we can at least get some dates nailed down and come together in March, and equally importantly through staff, identify people who are interested in presenting testimony in the general subject matter of that testimony, we'll do better to then have, and I'm suspecting, Ms. Rumberg, that you have a few folks already in mind, and that's great. For at least for me, I kind of need to know what's out there and be presented with a list. We can then structure the hearings, and I'm hopeful with one eye on, gee, is it a burden to have somebody we want to hear drug out to Pittsburgh or to Blair County or wherever, so that we both have coherent hearings, and we meet what I believe our charge is to make ourselves and our deliberations fully available to the people of Pennsylvania. But the number of hearings beyond getting some started is up to this group. Dr. Christian.
So in listening to what you're suggesting, it seems like if we have some hearings in different geographic areas in the state, it might be useful to take, even if we do, I don't know, 2 days of testimony or hearings, and then try to think of different themes for different parts of those days, so that in the morning, for example, you're hearing testimony, or you're hearing from people who want to talk about mandated reporting, and then later in the day we might have another topic that would be important, and then maybe just another topic, so that we can even organize how we're listening to what people are saying, so that it's not all just all over the place and there's some themes to it. Am I correct?
That's sort of my thought. At least that's sort of how my brain works. But the other, and I'm saying that's where there's sort of a two-sided piece to that, because I certainly don't want to go, let's say, to Pittsburgh or up to to Erie or someplace, and have people waiting, wanting to get to us, and if we've only scheduled one day, we're certainly not going to say, no, we don't want to hear from you. Your testimony fits in down at Philadelphia, so that I think we're not going to be able to stick rigidly to a theme. But if we at least start out, with a theme, and then maybe just have an open period of time when anybody who has relevant information. I think this will be a more meaningful discussion if staff hands us a list, if we have at least a fair idea. And when I say staff, if you've got people in mind, before we depart today, we'll figure out, maybe we'll get a volunteer from among staff as to who's sort of the lightning rod for potential witnesses. And, let's get all of those names together, have some staff contact, and by no means am I suggesting that you shouldn't talk to people individually and say, hey, would you like to testify? You may have colleagues, for instance, in your respective institutions or in the broader, that you've gotten to know in your respective practices, who you think should be witnesses. Let's get the names together, and then, for one thing, we maybe won't need to take as much time of the group like this. We can circulate the names with at least a brief description of what it is what their expertise is, what it is they have to generally to talk about. And I'm kind of hoping that this will be that it'll almost suggest itself, that we kind of intuitively will say, oh yeah, this person, this person, this person, and this person would all logically be heard together, and then we'll try and figure out any logistical difficulties, whether it's a real hardship for them to go one place as opposed to another. But that would be the objective. And in terms of the sort of the broader question of how wide do we throw our net, again, I'm going to keep coming back to the resolution, although the restoring public confidence in the ability of the Commonwealth to protect the victims of child abuse is a pretty, that's pretty broad. I think that permits quite a wide range of things. But I think from the hearing standpoint, it will be best if we have some idea of who would like to be heard or who we think we should hear from. So the question recurs, well, does anybody else want to be heard on this sort of general subject?
I was going to make one
Yes?
comment. I mean, I think in the traditional sense, hearings is, people coming before and talking to us. I have received personally around 50 emails since I was appointed to this task force with really outstanding opinions, people that I would never have thought to talk to, people with incredible experience. And I think kind of like when the United States, there's this, open public comment period, I think we need to offer the opportunity in that way, even if someone doesn't have the ability to skip work for a day and, come, or we don't know who they are, to give their opinion, their perspective in some kind of, I don't know if it's an email drop box or some other way that doesn't require a personal appearance. And I think some of the comments that I've gotten, people have said, I don't want people to know that I sent this to you because of my current position. However, here's my opinion.
Oh,
and I think those you won't get in a hearing.
I think we should always give that opportunity. That's transparency, and I think we should always give everybody in the Commonwealth, and even outside of the Commonwealth, if there are experts that want to submit testimony or ideas to us. The only thing that I would say is I would like to see us really have focus on this group so that we actually have something tangible at the end of it. I think that we should take all the ideas, and even some of the ideas we may not incorporate simply because it may be beyond the scope, but certainly Beverly is here, and obviously her staff will be here, and she is more than capable of taking a lot of those ideas and then continuing some of the work with all of the experts around this table. So I think that focus is very important. I know sometimes, and Beverly knows this, I mean, I throw out a lot of ideas at the staff and a lot of ideas, and then I leave them sort of holding the bag, and then I go back and say, gee, maybe I should have more focus myself so that we actually get something done rather than trying to do 3,000 things. So, I think we really have a tremendous opportunity here, and I think gathering all the ideas, gathering all the input electronically is great, through telecommunication and all the modes of communication we have with IT, we should be able to gather so much throughout this process. And then the staff will have to sift through some of it, of course, as you know. But I just like to see us have that, razor-sharp focus so we fulfill the mandate in that resolution.
Yep, and I think that and it hadn't occurred to me, frankly, that people, but it's natural that they would be sending you sort of, gee, I don't necessarily want to testify, but this is something that's important. Do we have that email address yet?
We don't.
Okay.
Because we've decided to do it a little differently.
Okay, well, now, that's and where technology is concerned, had I blissfully remained on the bench, I would never have even had a cell phone. I ran for office, so I have an iPhone that, I turned it off, but it would be barking at me instead of doing the marimba. No. So an email address is one thing, a website is another. Vicki, you had indicated to me yesterday that there was some joint discussions with the House about setting up a website.
On the LDP site that the public can access, there will soon be a link, and we'll get everyone the email address that will have all the notices for the meetings as well as the testimony when we do hearings. So the email listed there.
Great. Well, that's at least part of it. But certainly, any ideas, anything that any of us are receiving or come up with on our own, I think needs to be put into a central hopper and then shared with all of us. That would be number one in my mind. There is no, from the standpoint of transparency, I don't think there is anything that staff should, oh, well, that's off the point, and we don't get it. That if you're game to read it, I think we should at least have access to it all. I think once we have, that should produce that process plus people we know already, people staff can identify, will certainly produce a broad list of potential witnesses, and either by communication short of a gathering, or that's what I'm envisioning in March, that we have that discussion. Okay, here's the list of folks who think they have something to offer, and let's focus it down. And Mr. Secretary, you're right on the money. What was it, Mao or somebody let 1,000 ideas flower or something like that. One of my professors told me about. But let's get all the ideas out there. Then let's winnow them. Let's figure out who needs to be heard at hearings. Again, one of the other charges is that we simply accept written testimony, that you don't have to be a witness, a live witness, in order to get information to this task force, so that to the extent people, even anonymously, want to put things in, we can take it and weigh it for what it's worth. But at least once we throw our net as wide as possible, and then by March figure out what we're going to hear about in April. Fine, more hearings, fine with me. If the rest of the panel are game, I always like getting around Pennsylvania. It sort of works out nicely that if we're not traveling in February, but as soon as the spring breaks through, everywhere except down in the Southwest, in that valley where no sun shines. I don't think we have anybody from down there, but we're good to go. To some extent, I'm still kind of thinking that at least if we start out with a focus on the two major urban areas, because that's just, there are a lot of people packed in there, and the problems of poverty and other issues which sort of exacerbate that. So I'm thinking that we will have no shortage of people in each of the two major urban areas to testify. Where we go from there, I mean, there's certainly no magic about Harrisburg, and whether if people are up for 6, let's go for it. But I think we need to make sure we've got people to hear, and that's a good expenditure both of our time and of the whatever limited funds it takes to actually do this. So I think we were going to try and bring our calendars. Do these materials include that calendar thing?
Oh, calendar yet.
Oh, okay.
Because we weren't exactly sure how you all wanted to do it. It's very difficult to coordinate all these calendars. Mm-hmm. So we were trying to even think of what is that mechanism. Should we just pick a few dates, send it out to everybody, and say, okay, that works? Would that be best?
There are some very easy internet,
you think about doing that?
Yes, where everybody can just check what's available, what's not available.
Yeah, and part of the problem was we did not have everybody's email address. So now that we do, that's going to make it. We were not able to get it actually. We can get it either from some of the members from the House Senate or everybody's. That's part of the issue.
Okay. Well,
but now that we do, why don't we try to set something like that up, Dr. Christian?
You want me to set it up? No.
No. We'll set it up. I like your idea.
Okay, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're not going to try and nail this.
We'll do that.
Thank you, Heather.
Yeah. We're not going to try and nail this down today, but by hopefully the end of this is Thursday. By the end of business on Monday, can we have each of you then send in to Heather your schedules, say through June, to the extent you know them. The planned vacations. Now the summer gets tougher with the shore or whatever people do in the summer, but hopefully we can work around that. Is there anybody who doesn't think they could do 3 hearings in 2 weeks?
It depends on the weeks.
Okay.
I'll be out of the country for a few weeks.
Okay. Well, that, hoping that we can find an overlap in our schedules, we will then endeavor to have a cluster of 3 hearings, and why don't we say an appropriate location in the greater Pittsburgh area, appropriate location in the Delaware Valley, and we can leave the central Pennsylvania one up. We can decide that in March. I think there'll still be adequate time to find a location. Obviously, we can always get someplace in the capital. If we want to go somewhere else, there should be time to identify that location. And can we?
An email out to all of you, back to her with the availability. She's at State College. We'll be back.
Is it possible to identify, so we walk away from here with something, a fixed point in time, a date in March that we could all regather here with because that will at least be a hinge point. It'll give staff a target to get materials to us, whatever materials are forthcoming from various sources, whatever we want to throw into the hopper and have redistributed to all of the other members, and hopefully a list of likely suspects as to testimony, presenting materials, live testimony at hearings. I'm pretty wide open. How does the second week in March? Great. Okay. Well, let me just pick it. How about Thursday the 8th? Anybody?
In March.
Okay. Well, the middle. So that includes the first full week in March is not good. So the 15th. How's the 15th work for everybody?
The week of Mr. Chairman, the week of the 12th through the 16th is Child First Pennsylvania's last week for its certification at Messiah College, and I could do my best to be here, but I am obliged to that right now.
Okay. We got a lot of thumbs up, so you're in some jeopardy. How about the 22nd?
That would not work for me. I'll be out of the country.
Okay. Well, you sounded.
Yeah, I know.
Mr. Koudelakis, you sounded very decently kind of uncertain, like maybe you could. Is there anybody else who has a problem with the 15th? All right. And the 29th, and again, the 29th doesn't, I hate to push it back that late. Yeah. And, well, let's go back, then let's revert to the 8th. Aside from Dr. Berger, is there anybody else who has a problem with the 8th? Is it?
But I can miss it. I can switch it. It's the round.
You don't see this.
And Dr. Berger, how, you're. Okay. And, well,
I could just go to the next one.
So we've got one conflict for the 8th, two for the 15th, at least two for the 22nd, I think. Right? Well, if it's, can't make an omelet without breaking eggs. Yes, that would seem to be pretty dispositive. Well, how about, I can't imagine much goes on at the Capitol in general on Friday. How about the 9th?
Are you presenting all day?
I'm presenting on Friday, and actually.
Oh, there you go. Well, what about the 16th? Those of you who had a problem on the 15th? Oh, okay.
You know what? Can I make a suggestion?
Absolutely.
Just because we met.
respectfully, I'd really like to nail down one date. Because the problem is, it's not going to get any better. If we did all this electronically,
I think that, everyone may have a conflict, so if it was done. At some point, someone's going to have a conflict for something.
well, the other thing that occurs to me, we need to worry about recording facilities, right?
No, we can find another room if this.
How about the 5th, 6th, or 7th of March? Well, again, you're just way too much in demand, Doctor. That's a good question. How about March 1st?
I'm in a trial on that date.
Yeah, I'm thinking the 8th. Let's just everybody do the best they can. Certainly, we can arrange phone hookups, and yes. No. You see, that's why I'm thinking that this is a little bit less critical. My objective for the 8th, and more so from what I'm hearing, is by the 8th, we've had shared with each of us everything that staff can come up with, and hopefully plowed through it. So we're sort of at a common level of information. We will have, and that's why I'm really interested in having a date, so staff has a deadline, a list of potential witnesses with general subject matter, so that we can then sort of stage manage, figure out a hearing, see how many people we have. It may be that we don't have enough, we've got so many potential witnesses that 5 hearing days isn't enough. It may be that 3, we're going to be looking around for folks. I just don't know what's going to be forthcoming, but at least we have a list, and this gives you a deadline, too. If there are people that you particularly think ought to be heard from, give them a call, say, hey, I need to know by the 1st of March, are you interested? What would you give us a little blurb, and I'll get it into the hopper for you. And staff will be charged with spreading the word to the whatever extent is sort of feasible, short of buying pages in newspapers, that okay, we're looking for witnesses. We want to hear from you. And I'm picturing this, and it looks like we're gravitating to the 8th. To pull that together, then staff can set up the hearings, and we're working for now on the assumption that maybe right after Easter, you've got holidays before that, but that will leave. That will leave to the electronic process. Everybody's going to dump their calendars into the great computer, Heather's great computer in the sky, and whatever comes out of it, hopefully we'll get the grim model of like 2 weeks when we can have some hearings and figure out where we're going. But if we can at least have that linchpin, then everything sort of proceeds from that. So we will, barring great catastrophe, is anybody going to have their nose out of joint seriously if we do it on the 8th, with apologies to those who have conflicts? It sounds like that's the least conflicted, and it will get folks going, because, again, I'd sooner rather be forward with this process than scurrying to catch up and not in a position to provide the legislature with anything until after the summer. What suits? Either we certainly don't want to do it earlier than 10. There you go. Do we want to? I mean, one of the problems with 1:30, I think there were a number of people who had conflicts today with another thing the governor had scheduled. We want to say 10:30. Does that? I don't know how many of you are early risers versus good for you. Then you can come by and get me, and I can drink my coffee on the way up. But so 10:30, the 8th of March, we'll presume in this room, there will be a sunshine notice done, and if there's some conflict, it'll be somewhere in the Capitol.
Since I think we're going to be trying to plan how many hearings we need at that meeting in March, I'm wondering if we ought to arbitrarily set a time frame for testimony, no more than, because we get 150 folks and we're going to give them each half an hour, we have a problem.
Oh, yeah. My first thought would be that that's something maybe we do in March and see where we are, because, again, I'm not clear. I have probably less of an idea than a lot of you who are likely to be witnesses. Some people, I think, may group and 2 or 3 people coming, all with different aspects of some position. I would think in general, if you can't say 15 minutes particularly, where we're receiving, I would encourage written testimony just for the sake of staff, if nothing else, because it's recorded, but then it has to be transcribed. Well, it has to be transcribed, or I guess these days we marvels of the, pull together the disc. But it's still a whole lot easier, at least wherever possible. All of their thoughts are being target. Anything else on scheduling that? Next. Now, one of the other thoughts that, I guess now that I've gone back on the record, just for the record, the only member who was unable to be here, and because of the short notice, Mr. William Strickland was not able to make it today, but clearly we have a quorum, and so don't know that we've really done any official business, but we have met the requirements of the resolution. One of the thoughts that I had, because, as I say, I think I know what I know, although that gets dimmer with time, but not what I don't know, and particularly for those of you who are in either the medical or the victim end of this, if there is a, up to a 200-page book, or especially, great, one that might be in the library, but, well, there you go. If there's anything that you that would really provide, that you would want all of the rest of us to know about what you do, about what your perspective of child abuse. So, Dr. Christian, you have something for everybody, or is it something we can?
It's a publication from the American Academy of Pediatrics called Fostering Health, and it's guidelines for really kind of the gold standard for health care for children in child welfare, foster care. I don't know if everybody needs a copy. I don't know if I can get a copy for everybody. I do have an extra copy, and I'd be happy to supply that to you, and then maybe you take a look at it and let me know whether you think we need more copies for everyone.
That'd be great.
Replicate if somebody needs something.
Is it a journal? Did you say?
No, it's a book.
It's and it's called what? I mean, maybe we.
Fostering Health. It's published by the American Academy of Pediatrics. I don't know that everybody needs. I don't know that everybody needs it. And if I'll put on my calendar to bring a copy.
Okay.
It's kind of, it serves as just an overall blueprint for how I think about kind of the health needs of children who are in foster care. Not that I necessarily would do everything that's in that book, but it's at least a place to start around health issues. But again, it doesn't address all these other important issues, which are reporting issues and mandated reporting, et cetera. It's just something in the medical field.
Well, anything else, I mean, from the education standpoint, I don't know, Mr. Ipock, you may have attended a lecture, seen a scholarly monograph, whatever. I'm just thinking that this is an opportunity to share amongst all of us I'm actually wondering if there may be some case law, for instance, from the legal judicial side of things. I don't. Again, the dependency area isn't one that I've ever done any practicing in, but whether there are things from the legal side that we'd want to share with those who are in the medical or we're going to be deluged with material that staff send us. All of you, I assume, have gotten this ring binder. At least it gives us the basic statutes and the resolution, which is our pole star in these endeavors. But this is an opportunity for us to have all of the sort of common base of knowledge. Mr. Koutourakis, you've been dealing with this, as you described, sort of from a variety of different angles. I don't know whether there are, resolutions, things from the various groups that you've been involved in, that just anything that I'm certainly realizing as I'm sitting here that, there are folks who have a whole different perspective and know a lot of things that I don't have a clue about. I think our deliberations will be better if we all sort of have a common base of knowledge. And it's one of the things that occurs to me we can be doing in the next month.
And it may be easy. There are a lot of these things, journals and articles that we can submit to you, and we can all have them electronically. It might be easier to be able to read them that way. So just make that recommendation, and you can give us Heather's contact information or whoever, and then we can send those to you electronically, and people can download them at their website.
Should we go through there, or do you want them to come to us and then we would? Okay, and her email is H.
Oh, this is the magical.
Yes, 4 HAL.
With no dots. Bane of my existence. Okay.
Yeah, I was going to say, that'll teach her how to be here.
Mr. Ipock.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think it's a good idea, too, in the month that we have, besides reading, is take the opportunity maybe to make individual phone contacts and talk to some of our own, to each other a little bit, that we haven't had a chance to do today, to kind of expand just what you said. I'm sitting here knowing that I have a certain base of knowledge and none at all at some other ends. And people know then where my frame of reference is, and I know where everyone else's is. So maybe we can use that month to communicate in whatever fashion we can among ourselves.
Absolutely, and again, I assume counsel will haul me up if I'm suggesting some violation of the Sunshine Law or something. But I'm anticipating that in each of your disciplines or community of contacts, if people, whether it's emailing ideas that you want to share, if it's just reaching out, however, hey, I'm on this task force, there's an opportunity to do something. Do you have any ideas? Would you like to testify? Do you, or there, this is where, we're charged particularly with the issue of reporting and who should be mandated to report. What are the pitfalls? What are the opportunities? This is a time for us to sort of reach out and, number one, to build the witness list, to figure out who we all need to hear from and who should have an opportunity on the record to address this issue, because, again, we're, I guess to some extent, building a record for the legislature, who will consider any legislative matters to address. And certainly to the extent that there is an opportunity for sort of a broader looking at the world of child well-being in Pennsylvania, the Senate's good enough to provide us with a way of recording all that, and so there's the potential of a transcript.
I would say, I think the idea of having testimony, I feel that I come into this with an open idea in terms of I want to hear what other people say, but clearly I have my own opinions, and maybe because I gave testimony at one of the hearings, which was at Children's, I think maybe my feelings might be more known than other people because you can get them on the internet now, because the hearings were obviously transcribed. But I think that there are certain ideas that maybe if we all have each other's emails, there's a lot that can go on, because I think we do have our own opinions and ideas from our own experience, and that's one of the reasons that we're on the committee is I have evaluated hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of children with physical abuse from a medical perspective. And so I think maybe that's another starting point to look at our own thoughts, and obviously we take the opinion of everybody else, but we do have our own opinions based in our own decades of experience.
Absolutely. Now, you've just told me something. I want to see your testimony. That's something that I would benefit from, I assume. Yeah, okay. There you go. And, that's sort of the stuff that I'm thinking we will work better and understand each other's base of to the greatest extent possible. I'm sure that in the various hats you've worn in the various settings, there may be materials that you've,
That's okay. I'm sorry. I will listen.
Well,
I think it's, because of my role now, I think it's incredibly important that I hear what others are saying.
at any event, whether it's, as I say, scholarly writings.
Opinions out there?
Well, opinions are one thing. I have a feeling that there aren't any shrinking violets here, and that when it comes to offering opinions, we'll.
Being well behaved today, right? Well, because I think we're also passionate about this issue. That's the bottom line. Everybody in here, I look around and what I see are people that have been doing this for a very long time, who are very passionate about what they do see, and what they believe needs to be done differently. So,
well, to the extent that is underpinned by anything that you think would be useful to share with the group, I'm addressing myself to all of you, this would be a great time to do that. We're using Heather. Her computer may melt down, but I guess the department has another. We'll try and share that with each other, or where things are available on, just the email or, whatever kind of address it is, so that we can all look it up ourselves. All right, we have at least one hearing date. Everybody's going to dump their calendars in by next Monday. Anything else for the good of the order? I think we're winding this down. Anything anybody wants to get said before we depart?
really, the only thing I'd like to say is if you see any other materials as you look through your book that you believe you need to have, if you let me know, I'll go make sure that we have them available to everybody. For us, the Child Protective Services law is kind of the Bible. And again, the issue becomes, I read in the resolution where it talks about any other changes to the current law. I think that's a really good, as we go through it, what are those pieces that really may not be applicable anymore, or maybe need to be tweaked or done differently? Our practice looks different. And I think most of you know that the practice is different now from your capacity. So if I have the opportunity, or if you want somebody to take the opportunity, I know Sandy Moore from the AOPC or Justice Baer could come and talk about what the practice looks like from the court's perspective. But their perspective is also our perspective. We're partners in that process. So I think that's somebody that we need to reach out to look at what the practice today looks like. And I'm not sure it's accurately reflected in the law. So again, it may take some of the attorneys in the room to really take a look at what the law says, and is the practice consistent as we go through the processes and the practices that we're using in Pennsylvania today. So this is a wonderful opportunity, I think, for all of us.
Do we have the General Protective Services law in here?
That is...
Yeah.
It is?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, the CPSL is in there.
I know, but I don't see the...
The juvenile, you have the Juvenile Act, and that's...
Oh, that's that's GPSL.
GPS is included as part
Right.
of CPSL.
Right.
The GPS is in the CPS?
And as you mentioned GPS, I think it's important to put on the table that part of the reason our data is skewed is because we don't count GPS. And GPS is really our piece of neglect and a lot of the environmental things, the things that we see, the truancy stuff. So that's part of the issue. And, you know, DPW has, I mean, it's been 2 months, but one of the issues we threw out there right away is differential response. How do we look at GPS? How do we look at CPS? I mean, gosh, if we can move forward with it with the help of this group, that would be just incredible, because we're doing some research on it right now, and I think that would put us in line with other states. So we need to take a look at that as well.
And the 3490s aren't in the packet from the code. 3490, I don't think they're in there. Maybe I missed it.
You want the 3490s? Oh. The regs?
The regs, the 3490s, it lets us get some insight in what happens from the CYS.
You don't want all the bulletins, do you?
No. I don't think.
Okay.
The other thing I think it needs clarification, so there's an appreciation since this is a public record, is the system is, when we talk about just kind of focusing on the mandated reporting initially, the definition of perpetrator right now in the CPSL relates to somebody who has a special relationship with the victim. And that's why it's important that we keep the doors open to looking at statute of limitations in the crimes code as well, because if you don't have that special relationship, in other words, if I walk out the street today and I assault a 5-year-old and break the orbital socket and essentially commit an aggravated assault, that's not child abuse by definition, unless I have that special relationship, okay? So that's why when we say let's just focus on the mandated reporting focuses really on, and the investigation starts on that special relationship. If you don't have one, then Jackie has to pick up the ball and run with it from the criminal prosecution piece. So I think it's important that we look at those things and that dynamic in Pennsylvania. And I don't know if that made any sense to anybody. I hope it did. So.
I just want to say that that's a struggle constantly that we have when we're doing education pieces. It's a struggle to explain there's a civil definition of child abuse and there's a criminal definition of child abuse. And I never limit our cases to the civil definition, but it's a constant thing that we hit up against and creates a lot of misunderstanding in the law. So I agree, it's an issue out there.
What would the practical effect be? I'm just trying to understand, okay, so you walk up to an 8-year-old who's standing waiting for the bus and whack him one for no good reason. You're subject to criminal prosecution. How does that fit within what we're doing here?
Well, when we look at the converse of that is why isn't it child abuse? And you look at why is it civil versus criminal and the burdens of proof that go along with that and the different kinds of consequences. The Child Protective Services law, the consequences really are dealing with employment. And so we indicate child abuse, and that is a warning to employers that employ persons that work with children. Right. Or eventually, if there's a conviction or a hearing before a judge, it can be changed, the status can change to founded, which under a case from the Commonwealth Court bars employment for a period of 5 years after the case is made founded. And so I know when we look at what's gone on in the high-profile case with Jerry Sandusky, we talk about were there loopholes that we should be patching. And one of the loopholes I think we would agree on, Jackie would agree with me on, is these definitions and interplay or lack of interplay between the two, that we have to keep our eye on that interplay.
So you're saying, and it'll be good maybe if I'm the interlocutor here because I'll be the most simple-minded person and we'll get it all sorted out. Your concern, practically speaking, is that someone who wasn't in a professional relationship at all did this just out on the street, they should end up being labeled. They're not presently under the Child Protective Services law at all. They need to be labeled so they also are not eligible to be running a daycare.
I'm suggesting that there's a situation, at least at Penn State, where there were holes that apparently were not filled and there were ongoing, at least alleged abuses. And that's a great example, although it happens every day in many other forms across the state, that we should be cognizant of. And I don't know if that person should be labeled a child abuser or not, or if it should always be criminal or not. But I think we need to keep our eye on that and gather information to figure that out, because the second prong is not mandatory reporting, it's supposed to gather the public's confidence in the Child Protective Services law, and I think that goes to that piece of it.
I'm not necessarily disagreeing with you, I'm just sort of trying to understand. So you're saying that right now, the Child Protective Services law does not include the fact that you've been convicted of a violent crime or of some other crime? I honestly don't know. I don't have a clue. It does, it doesn't.
It depends on right, relationship, the definition of perpetrator. However, I think we have to remember that what the practice looks like. And Child Protective Services, and first off, the people that investigate Child Protective Services are not criminal investigators. They're not police. They're young 20-year-old caseworkers. And the practice of child abuse is about protecting children, looking into permanency for them, well-being, and to promote strong families. And the issue then becomes, our practice now is we find family. We look at permanency for children. We recognize the children that grow up outside of the scope of, and family being very broadly defined, by the way, outside of family creates a worse situation for children in many situations. So the practice model has to be consistent with the law, and the law is really about strengthening families and helping children to grow up safely within the context of their own homes. So that's the practice that we've been using in Pennsylvania over the last 10 years.
Let me add, all right, so there's a little bit of discussion about who reports to who and what's a crime and what goes to child welfare, okay? And we have around the table a bunch of educated people who really know something about how this works. Imagine that you're just a person in Pennsylvania and you think a child has been sexually abused, okay? I think one of our goals could be to try to simplify things so that the public would have confidence that if they called, this number, then this would be appropriately investigated. They're not going to understand the difference between the CPS law and the crimes code and the 3490 regs and all of those things. So, I just think that those are some of the issues I think that we could address as well.
So
That's my question.
Yeah. So could we even ask joint state government to take a look? Can we begin that process of asking them to look at how broad definitions are of perpetrators in Child Protective Services law in other states? Is that a good question to begin with? That you all feel comfortable with?
I may have that. Let me check so that we can, I think I have that.
That would be wonderful.
I'll let you know by tomorrow.
Okay. And if you do, send it to me and I'll get it out to everybody for their review.
I agree 100% with Cindy, by the way, about figuring out numbers and who to call, and there has to be a single way to do this. But I think the issue of the civil definition, the criminal definition, from a practicing standpoint, this is one of the most frustrating and difficult things we deal with, because the civil definition in Pennsylvania in many cases is more stringent than the criminal definition. So while the CPS code wants to keep families together, there are many, many times where you have things that meet the criminal definition of assault or whatever it is, but do not meet the civil definition. So while we try to keep a family together, we're prosecuting one of those people who's living in that home as a criminal, but we're trying to keep the family together. And those two are what we see as a constant struggle. So I think it's very hard to, I think these all have to get answered together again, because they do affect keeping a family if your criminal definition is different.
Clarify, and this has been an issue that's been a source of contention all over the Commonwealth, because as we say, keeping families together, the first thing people think is the expectation is that you keep a child in a home with a perpetrator. That is not true. We can't broadly, and I believe there was a lawsuit filed, I think, in Fayette County regarding this issue of can you make a broad statement that no child should ever be in the home of a sex offender. That's a whole different issue. We're saying safety first, period, first, foremost. Then we're saying kids, and again, think of your own children. You take or grandchildren or whoever, take a 10-year-old away from everybody they know and love and put them in a whole different environment. What is the impact on them? So we're defining family very broadly. It's who that child believes to be their family. So it can be, for me, I don't have family nearby. It would be my very best friends. And if I needed a resource for my child, it's going to be them, not the home where the perpetrator is. So again, I'm afraid that I've learned recently that maybe the message has not been clear, because you never want to jeopardize safety. But we do want to do what's in the best interest of children. So I think it's really important, and through this process, maybe we can frame it so it makes sense. Because I think the arguments you're making really aren't, because that's not what we're telling yet. I think it's being interpreted that way by some staff across the Commonwealth. We have 67 counties, loads of caseworkers. They're all, many of them are young, inexperienced. So we've got to make sure the message is clear. And again, family, very broadly defined, but it's people the child knows. That becomes first, not necessarily the person that injured, and it shouldn't be the person that hurt them.
Oh, I think so. I'm sorry, I probably wasn't made myself clear. I kind of meant that when families, there are cases in which perpetrators can safely live with a family, and the family is being kept together because the person may not be dangerous on a day-to-day basis, but it becomes very difficult while the civil system and the CPS system is trying to keep that family together, and perhaps justifiably so, because that person can be learn to parent, but yet the criminal system, because of the criminal code, is continuing to be in that, to prosecute. I want to make, Mother, from a researcher's perspective, I think it's very hard. I think one of the issues is, what is the burden to children in Pennsylvania in terms of whether they're being hurt? And I think that sometimes, I always cite this one case we had where the mother's drug dealer was the one who almost killed the child. It didn't count as child abuse because that drug dealer had absolutely no relationship with the child. But the fact was, as a society, we didn't protect that child. And I think as a state, we need to understand what children are being hurt, whether it's by some guy at the bus stop or the mother's drug dealer. And so, because of the current definition, I don't think we have a good sense of really how many children are being hurt, and if it takes a village to raise a child, I don't think we do. We need to know how many it is, even if they don't count. If they don't count, that's okay. They need to count in the eyes of understanding what children are seeing in the state.
If we can just keep an eye on the fact that we do have two systems, and I do believe they're necessary and important. In the civil system, they have 60 days to investigate that alleged child abuse. Because the burden's lower, they can often do that in a timely way. Oftentimes, if you have a sexual abuse case that you have to prosecute, getting DNA tests and things like that can't happen in 60 days, and it takes longer to do that. So keeping an eye on the differences in the burdens and things is important as we go through this. I don't know that we want to really do away with those dual parallel systems.
Well, I'll tell you, one of the things, and again, maybe I will gather this in the course of the next month, but one of the things we might even want, certainly would benefit me either at the next meeting or one of the first things we do at a hearing, is to have someone, perhaps from a Child Protective Service agency, wherever we're going, just do a little chalk talk about, talk me through. I'm either from the child's perspective, or I'm the mother of a child who has just been identified by somebody on Childline as a potential possible victim of abuse or neglect. What does that look like? What are the steps? Because we're looking at it from the law down, and ultimately, you're right. The folks out there who want to understand what's happening, and hopefully for whom we can provide some make the law more transparent in terms of what you would, if we were in a village and you were just going down to the village elder and saying, hey, Sally down there, I just saw her, whack her kid, and the kid was walking around in circles for 4 minutes. What do we do about it? What do we do about that now, and what's wrong with how we deal with it? And certainly the interaction of the criminal and the civil systems are a part of that, but I'm not sure that I understand, at least from the civil, I know I don't understand what happens. We've certainly identified one area to talk about, and maybe one of the things we want to do, you may know some outstanding folks in your, who are just troops on the ground dealing with these issues. I'm sure you do, both in Pittsburgh and Philadelphia or wherever around the state. It may be that that's somebody we want to hear from, just to, what happens.
It sounds like what you might want is like a primer on like the CPS law or on kind of, what happens in the steps of an investigation, and maybe that's something you might want to do on March 8th when we meet.
I have been to plenty of trainings where children and youth have presented a flow chart of how a referral is made, and I think that might be real helpful to everyone. It starts with the Childline report or just a report to, children and youth. Perhaps we could benefit from everyone sharing that.
We have a child welfare training program. I'm sure that
It's probably part of it.
But I know that they would have that, and really any other information that you require, I think we can get. So I'll get that flow chart.
Anything else for the good of the order? All right. Then, unless there is anything else, I guess we've accomplished what we can accomplish today. Look forward. Please feel free to give me a call if there's anything. I can comprehend email, but I understand just talking on the phone even better.
So much nicer.
And we'll look forward to. Yes, you will be. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.